The International AIDS Conference that's taking place in the United States, Washington. The conference comes after a significant time where the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has approved the first drug to reduce the risk of HIV infection in uninfected individuals who are at high risk of HIV infection. The world now spends about $17 billion a year in AIDS prevention and treatment in the developing world. Let's speak to Junaidseedat, the health director from MOYA, and find out how the conference will change the face of HIV and AIDS. It's good to have you, Seedat. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning.
What does a big conference of this sort mean for ordinary South Africans that are affected and infected with HIV?
Okay, well, thank you for having me this morning. I think the conference really does debate and discuss a lot of issues, especially at the international level. But really, when one looks at the ordinary South African in the street and how the decisions made there actually impacts them, it doesn't really impact them very directly. I think some of the announcements made, some of the research findings that are actually announced at the conference will ultimately flow down to the person on the street. But reality is the conference is really about policymakers, advocacy officers who are really coming together to try and determine the international direction of where the fight against HIV is going.
Yeah. One of the most important things is to fast-track treatment and the fight against new HIV infections. Is South Africa winning? Are we moving faster?
I think we are. We've had an incredible campaign over the last year and a half where we've tested 13 million people for HIV. But I think the challenge still remains. We cannot treat ourselves out of this epidemic. The cost of treatment is just way too high, and I think we all have it in our own power to stem this epidemic. And how do we start that? Is by prevention, making sure that we're having and making safe sexual choices, making sure that we're taking care of ourselves, our health and wellness. But at the end of the day, we are really going to be the ones as individuals who change the face of this epidemic by ensuring that we have safe sex, practice safer sexual behavior.
Is there awareness out there? I have a sense that there's not as much awareness as there used to be out there. When things were bad, there used to be just campaigns all over the place. But now that things are getting a little bit better, it seems, are we dropping the ball slightly? Do we still educate the nation as much as we should?
I think that's an excellent question. I think we are still educating, but not as much as we did in the past. I think the common goal of making sure the South Africans had treatment was combined and galvanized civil society. But I think what has happened over the last few years, you've noticed an absence, a paucity of communication coming out of government around HIV. With the monies being reduced for civil society, their ability to communicate is also being reduced. So ultimately, I don't believe we are continually educating our people about the risks of HIV and how changing their behavior can ultimately help us grapple with this epidemic.
Yeah. Over the years, government, however, have been praised a lot more for how they are treating HIV and AIDS. How do you perceive it right now as we stand in the year 2012?
Well, I think over the last 10 years we have gone through the major roller coaster ride when it comes to HIV. I think currently we have a Minister of Health who has been incredibly forceful in ensuring that we are addressing the problems that our country faces, HIV being one of the greatest, TB being another one of them. So I think from that perspective we're doing really well, but ultimately it is about the implementation, making sure that those drugs are in the clinics, making sure that communication is happening with people on the ground, and I think that is where we're still seeing major gaps in our addressing of the epidemics.
Let's talk about this drug now that we saw getting approval from the FDA. What does it mean for, firstly, how does it work, and what does it mean for South Africa, you know, when we do get this drug?
Okay. Well, Truvada was basically a drug that was tested out in conditions where people having high-risk sex, people like commercial sex workers, were taking this drug, and basically it then reduced their risk of actually getting infected. Now, I think this is a wonderful news, and it's really great news for certain sectors of the population. But let's consider for a second that while the Food and Drug Administration of the US has approved this drug, it'll now mean that this drug is available in the US, in Europe, and in South Africa. But generally, we have to admit, it's going to be available to those people with money, who have access to the medical aids. And for it to ultimately reach our public health facilities, I'm sad to say that it's still going to be a very long journey before we reach that. And just to give you an example, in South Africa, we probably have 5 or 6 regimes of ARVs to treat people. In Europe, anywhere up to 20 to 25 different regimes.
Wow.
So the idea of treating ourselves out of the epidemic, whilst it might work for the more developed countries with cheaper pharmaceuticals, when it comes to the developing world and us in South Africa, there's no way we can do this. And consider this, there are 9 million people in the world who still need treatment. For every one person that we put onto treatment, 2 people are getting newly infected. So at the end of the day, we have got to make sure that we use what we can as individuals to change our behavior, because there's no way any pill or any drug is really going to get us out of this epidemic.
Yeah, and a worry of having a drug out there that says, okay, well, if you are high risk and you do have a lot of sex, whichever way it is, take this tablet and you'll be okay. And it's a scary way of thinking. All right, well, listen, I want to talk more to you because there is so much that needs to be discussed, but we've run out of time. Junaidseedat, Health Director of Live MOYA, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here in studio. South Africa having a decent presence. I know that the Deputy President is in the US, in Washington. Are we holding our own there?
I think from the point of view of giving information to the world, demonstrating our research findings, etc., we are doing fairly well. But demonstrating a unified South African voice, I think, once again, we as South Africans have failed ourselves at the International AIDS Conference.
All right, unfortunately, leaving it on that note, Junaidseedat, thank you again for joining us.